I don't feed extra mouths. That's what my son said as he handed me a floor brush and a pair of cleaning gloves. He thought he was putting his newly retired mother to work to earn her keep in his house. He had no idea he was sending me to clean the very estate I was about to inherit. Richard gave me a bucket. I was about to give him a reality check that would bankrupt his future. My name is Cynthia Mercer. For 42 years, I taught history in the Columbus public school system. 2 weeks ago, I retired. And the following weekend, I moved into my son Richard's townhouse in Clintonville after selling my small house outside the city. At the time, it seemed practical. Richard said the commute would be easier for doctor visits and groceries. And I believed him. That evening, we were sitting at the kitchen table. Vanessa was scrolling through her phone, and Richard had just come home from work. I remember the sound of the refrigerator humming behind me, which is the kind of small detail you notice when a conversation changes direction. Richard placed a pair of cleaning gloves and a floor brush on the table. He said it in a calm voice, the same tone he used when explaining practical things. "Mom, you're retired now. There's no salary coming in." He said it as if the end of a paycheck erased everything that came before it, as if a lifetime of work disappeared the moment a paycheck stopped. Vanessa didn't look up, but she added, "Everyone contributes here." Then Richard said the sentence that stayed with me longer than anything else. "I don't feed extra mouths." For a moment, I thought he might be joking, though the room didn't feel like a place where jokes were happening. He explained that a property manager he knew was looking for someone to clean a large house in German Village. "It would be simple work," he said, and they paid cash. After that, he asked me for the house key so he could keep things organized. I looked at him for a few seconds before answering. I asked if he meant what he was saying. Richard nodded. Not angry, just firm in the way people are when they believe they are being reasonable. So I picked up the brush, not because I agreed with him, and not because I had no other choice. I picked it up because I realized something in that moment. Something I had probably been avoiding for a long time. Sometimes you do not understand who someone has become until you stop protecting them from their own behavior. The next morning, I would take the bus to German Village and walk through the gates of the house Richard had found for me to clean. I did not know yet how familiar that house would feel, or how quickly the balance between us would begin to shift. The next morning, I took the bus to German Village. The address Richard gave me led to a massive house hidden behind an iron gate, a place that felt far too quiet for its size. A man in a dark jacket named Daniel, the property manager for the Whitmore Heritage Trust, let me in. He handed me a bucket and brush, explaining that the estate was between owners and needed maintenance during the legal review. As I knelt to scrub the hallway's marble floor, a row of framed photographs caught my eye. One face stopped me cold, a woman with soft gray hair and a calm, familiar smile. It was Isabel Whitmore. I knew her from years ago, when I volunteered at Riverside Methodist Hospital. Over time, we ended up sitting together in the courtyard more than once, usually with tea, usually talking about books. Daniel seemed surprised that I knew her personally, noting that most people only knew her through the estate's business. I returned to the floor, my hands moving in steady circles across the cold stone. It felt surreal to be on my knees in a house belonging to a woman I had once known as a friend, not a superior, but I've always believed that if you start a job, you finish it properly. As I rinsed my brush later that afternoon, a strange feeling settled over me. I couldn't explain it yet, but the air in that house felt less like a workplace and more like a premonition. By the time I got back to Richard's townhouse, my hands were stiff and my knees felt older than usual. Still, dinner needed to be made, and I'd always been the kind of person who finishes the tasks in front of her before sitting down. Vanessa was in the living room watching television when I walked in. She glanced toward the kitchen but didn't ask how the day went. I started cooking quietly. Pasta, a simple sauce, and a salad. The familiar movements helped settle my thoughts. Richard came in while I was wiping the counter. He looked down at the kitchen floor. "You missed a spot near the sink," he commented. I followed his gaze. The tile looked fine to me. I'll clean it again after dinner, I replied. Vanessa leaned against the doorway. You know, if you're getting paid for that cleaning job, it would help if some of that money went toward groceries. I dried my hands on a towel and nodded once. There wasn't much point arguing over small things. Dinner passed with ordinary conversation, mostly about Richard's work. Afterward, they went upstairs while I washed the dishes. Later that evening, I walked past Richard's office and noticed the door slightly open. He was on the phone. I know we lost the last 2 contracts. He was explaining. That's exactly why we need the Whitmore Trust job. He paused. Listening. My company can handle all the maintenance systems across their properties. Once we land that contract, everything stabilizes. Another pause. Yes. The refinance application is still in progress. The bank just wants stronger financial backing. His voice lowered slightly. My mother moved in recently. She has retirement savings. That should help demonstrate family stability. I stood in the hallway and listened long enough to understand the shape of it. Richard was talking about me the same way people talk about supporting documents on an application, not as his mother, as part of the file. Sometimes people reveal more when they believe no one is listening. I went back to the kitchen and sat at the table. The house had gone quiet, except for the refrigerator humming behind me. That was the moment something settled in my mind with unexpected clarity. Richard didn't only see me as an extra mouth at the table. He also saw me as something else entirely. Later that night, I walked down the hallway to get a glass of water. As I passed Richard's office, I noticed the door was partly open. The light inside was still on. Vanessa's voice came first. She can't stay here forever. Richard. The house already feels crowded, Richard answered without lowering his voice. Relax. Let her work for now. There was a short pause. Vanessa continued, and after the refinance, we'll move her somewhere cheaper. Richard replied, a senior place outside the city, nothing fancy. And the house she used to own? She sold it already. He answered calmly. Remember, I told her it made more sense to move closer to us? Vanessa sounded relieved. So she doesn't really have anywhere else to go. Richard gave a quiet laugh. Exactly. I stood in the hallway holding the edge of the wall, listening to the rest of the conversation fade into smaller details about their mortgage paperwork. For a long moment, I didn't move. When I returned to my room, I sat on the bed and opened my phone. There was an email I had ignored several times over the past few weeks. The sender was a law office in Columbus. I had assumed it was a mistake or some broad probate outreach from some probate office that had picked up my name after the house sale. Under other circumstances, I might have deleted it without reading. They had written 3 times asking me to contact them regarding an estate matter connected to someone named Isabel Whitmore. I stared at the message for a while. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the number. The next morning, my phone rang while I was still sitting at the kitchen table. Richard and Vanessa had already left for work, so the house was quiet. Mrs. Cynthia Mercer, the voice asked. Yes. My name is Daniel Avery. I'm an attorney with Avery & Cole here in Columbus. We've been trying to reach you regarding the estate of Isabel Whitmore. For a moment, I didn't answer. The name felt like a door opening into a room I hadn't visited in years. I remember Isabel. I told him. That's good, he replied calmly, because according to her will, she remembered you very clearly. He explained that Isabel Whitmore had passed away 3 months earlier. During the estate review, the legal team discovered a handwritten addition to her will. That clause named me as a beneficiary. We attempted to locate you earlier, he continued, but your previous address had been sold, and your phone number had changed. I leaned back in the chair. What exactly does the clause say? There was a soft shuffle of papers on his end. Under the estate documents now being administered, you were named as a significant beneficiary of Whitmore Heritage Trust, he said. There is also a substantial financial distribution tied to Mrs. Whitmore's investment accounts. For a few seconds, I didn't speak. I had visited Isabel because she seemed lonely, not because she was wealthy. At the hospital, she had worn a simple sweater and spent most of our conversations talking about books. Daniel Avery continued, his tone steady. There is also a personal letter addressed to you. He read a short section aloud. She wrote that you were the friend who stayed when everyone else had somewhere else to be. I closed my eyes briefly. I could almost hear Isabel's voice in the hospital courtyard, asking if I had finished the novel she recommended. I never expected anything from her. I told him quietly. That may be exactly why she trusted you. He answered. After a short pause, he explained the next step. The trustees are meeting tomorrow at the Whitmore residence regarding several management proposals, he said. Because of the specific language, Mrs. Whitmore added, you have the right to attend, be heard, and participate in the review. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. One more detail, he added. One of the companies presenting tomorrow is Mercer Integrated Systems. I sat very still when I heard the name. That was Richard's company. After the call ended, I remained at the table for a long time. The sunlight had moved across the floor by then, and the kitchen clock had ticked through several minutes before I noticed. For the first time in months, something inside me shifted in a quiet but unmistakable way. I realized that the balance between my son and me was no longer what it had been the night before. The next morning, I returned to the Whitmore house in German Village. The iron gate opened automatically when I approached. And for the first time, I walked through the front entrance instead of the service door. Daniel Avery was waiting in the hallway. Good morning? Cynthia, he greeted, offering a brief handshake. The board is already here. He led me into a meeting room where 4 people sat around a long table. They introduced themselves as trustees responsible for managing the Whitmore estate until its long-term structure was finalized. Daniel spoke first. Mrs. Whitmore's estate documents give Cynthia Mercer a temporary consultative role during this review period. Daniel said, her views are part of the record before any contract is approved. I took the seat Daniel indicated and listened as they explained how the trust operated. Most of the discussion focused on maintenance and security systems for several Whitmore properties across Columbus. After a few minutes, another trustee opened a folder. We have 3 companies presenting proposals today, he explained. The contract would cover system maintenance across all trust properties. Daniel glanced briefly in my direction before reading the names aloud. The 3rd company was Mercer Integrated Systems. Richard's company, the trustee continued, unaware of the connection, if approved. The contract could run several years. I kept my expression neutral and folded my hands on the table. Daniel Avery had already disclosed to the trustees that Richard and I were related. That was exactly why I said as little as possible and kept my concerns tied to the documents in front of us. Sometimes the most important shift in a situation happens quietly, long before anyone else realizes it. The meeting with the trustees wasn't scheduled to begin for another hour, so I stepped outside and sat on a bench near the entrance. I took out my phone and made a call I'd been thinking about since the night before. I called my financial advisor and told him to withdraw any permission Richard had to reference or document my assets in support of his refinance. He understood immediately. We'll update the file on our side, he said. If a lender was relying on your documentation, they may have to revisit the application. None of it was dramatic work. Just paperwork. Really. None of it was dramatic work. Just paperwork. Really. Later that afternoon, I returned to the townhouse while the house was empty. I packed a small suitcase and walked through the rooms once, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. On the kitchen counter, I placed the garage remote beside a short note. I kept the message simple. I gave enough, then I closed the front door behind me. It was a quiet exit, but sometimes the most significant decisions happen without anyone noticing them at first. The trustees gathered in the conference room shortly after noon. I took a seat near the center of the table while Daniel Avery organized the agenda. The room stayed quiet, except for the sound of folders opening and papers sliding across the table. One by one, the vendors arrived. The first two presentations moved quickly. Both companies explained their security systems, maintenance schedules, and projected costs for the Whitmore properties across Columbus. The trustees asked practical questions, then thanked them for their time. When the door opened again, Richard walked in carrying a laptop and a thin presentation folder. He started toward the screen at the front of the room, speaking before he noticed me. "Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to present Mercer Integrated." His voice stopped. He stared across the table. "Mom." No one else reacted immediately. Daniel Avery simply continued the meeting. "Mr. Mercer, please begin." "Before that, allow me to introduce Cynthia Mercer, a beneficiary of Whitmore Heritage Trust, whose consultative role is part of today's review." Richard looked from Daniel to me, trying to understand what he had just heard. I didn't move. I kept my notes folded in front of me and said nothing. After a moment, Richard cleared his throat and opened his laptop. His presentation started normally, but the confidence he carried into the room had shifted. He spoke about system reliability, service coverage, and projected cost savings for the trust. When the trustees began asking questions, one of them turned to me. "Mrs. Mercer, do you have any concerns before we vote?" I took a moment before responding. "There is one issue worth discussing," I explained calmly. "The proposal references expansion plans. I noticed that Mercer Integrated Systems recently lost 2 service contracts. I'd like clarification on how the company plans to maintain staffing stability if additional properties are added." Richard looked at me sharply. "We're restructuring," he answered. "The Whitmore contract would stabilize our operations." Another trustee reviewed the documents in front of him. "These losses are recent," he noted. 2 major contracts within the past year." The discussion continued for several minutes. No voices were raised. It was simply business. Finally, the chairman folded his hands. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Mercer." The trustees voted. Mercer Integrated Systems was removed from the shortlist. The chairman stood and extended his hand politely. "We appreciate your time." Richard closed his laptop slowly. He looked at me once more before leaving the room, the confusion on his face clearer than anything he had said out loud. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded over the next few days in small, practical ways. Richard's mortgage refinance stalled first. Once it became clear my financial documentation could no longer support the file, the lender asked Richard for updated numbers. Without that outside support, the refinance no longer looked the same. His company also lost momentum. Without the Whitmore contract, the growth projections he'd presented to partners no longer made sense. One of those partners postponed a separate project that Richard had been counting on. A few days later, he came to the Whitmore house looking for me. I was standing near the entrance when he walked up the drive. "You knew that contract mattered to my business." He began without greeting. "I understood that," I answered. His voice tightened. "Then why sit there and tear it apart?" "I didn't tear anything apart," I replied calmly. "The board reviewed your proposal the same way they reviewed the others." Richard shook his head. "You could have supported it." That wouldn't have been honest. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking again. "So, this is revenge?" I folded my hands in front of me. "No. Revenge would mean I wanted to hurt you. Then what is it?" I took a breath before answering. "I stopped protecting you." Richard's expression shifted slightly, though he didn't respond right away. For years, I had quietly filled gaps in his life without thinking about the cost. Standing there that afternoon, I realized something simple. Once that protection disappears, the world starts behaving very differently. Several months later, part of the Whitmore house had been turned into a small community space for older women starting over. I volunteered there a few days each week. It felt like useful work, the kind that didn't require anyone to prove their worth first. One afternoon, Richard came by. He looked thinner, more careful with his words. "I'm rebuilding the company," He told me, slower this time. I listened, then set the old townhouse key on the table between us. You were worried I'd become a burden in your house. I told him quietly. You were worried I'd become a burden in your house. I told him quietly. You never understood how much of your future had been resting on my willingness to keep helping. He nodded, but didn't argue. Before he left, I told him something I've learned late in life: respect is easy to lose when people mistake kindness for obligation. I learned that kindness is often mistaken for obligation by those who only value profit. I stopped being Richard's safety net so he could finally learn how to walk on his own. So, tell me, if your own child treated you like a line item on a balance sheet, would you have the heart to cut them off? Or would you keep paying for their disrespect? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading every single one.